Angela, thank you so much for your time again, and welcome to Batch 3. We'd like to introduce you to the team, and I was excited about today's conversation to learn, what's on your roadmaps and share your perspectives on everything that's happening in 5G across the world, because you see so much. And so with that, maybe we'll just turn the floor over to you for an introduction, and if you wanted to lead off with a few slides, then we can jump into Q&A.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. So, hi, Batch 3, and it's really a pleasure to be meeting you, and welcome to the 5G Open Innovation Lab. As the Mantinet people were saying earlier, we are busy getting to know each and every one of you, and I have to say that this is an amazing cohort that's entering the 5G Innovation Lab, and we're really looking forward to doing some great innovation with you around 5G. So thanks all for your time and your efforts around this. As Jim just mentioned, I'm Angela Logothetis. I'm from a small town in the middle of Greece, right next door to Actually, our relatives went in completely different way. Jim's went off to Montreal. Mine came off to Australia. I'm originally Australian. You can probably tell by the accent and the jokes as to where I currently am. Normally, I'm based out of Bath, which is a World Heritage City, about 2 hours west of London in the UK. And I'm the CTO for Amdocs in the network. Most of my career has been built around telecommunications, and specifically software for the networks that telecommunications operate. I've kind of moved around the world, starting in Australia, then up to Malaysia, then Indonesia, Philippines, India, the US, and the UK, and who knows where to next. But it's been a really exciting journey so far. So an introduction to Amdocs. I'm just going to briefly bring up a deck that Hagai was very good in terms of helping prepare, but I will probably go way off track, so forgive me in advance, Hagai. But really, what I wanted this session to do was, one, be an introduction to Amdocs, two, kind of give you some of the global visibility as to what we see in 5G, and three, make it your session. If you've got any sort of questions, please feel welcome to jump in, make comments, or ask questions. Hagai, do you want to make a quick introduction before I get going on Amdocs?
Sure. So I'm Hagai Penn. I'm actually based in Seattle, which is a lot less interesting than all of Angela's journeys. So I'm the account manager for Amdocs for T-Mobile, focusing on 5G and cloud. Just a short intro to Amdocs, because I know people had several questions. So Angela, if we can jump to the next slide. So the main question that you started with is number of employees. So we're over 26,000 employees, 85 countries. Basically, we were known for the last 35 years as the billing company. We did all the billing, or what we call BSS, business support systems, to all the carriers around the world. In the US are basically all the big ones other than Verizon, so Sprint, AT&T, T-Mobile, of course, but we also are part of Comcast and Rogers, and from here to the Philippines, Globe, PLDT, and everything in between, Vodafone and so on. In the last years, we basically are driving the business experience for 3 billion people. So about just less than half of the world are all their experience around mobile communications and media is driven by Amdocs systems, heavily invested in the BSS systems, and Angela will tell you about our journey in the network in a minute. The last probably 3 years, we accelerated with the telcos moving from focusing on mobile communication to everything, internet, cable, TV, media, and so on. So we accelerate with them. And we can see in the next slide of the major acquisition we we are making. So we started on the left from basically customer billing, moving to care billing, and moving up the value chains with digital and down with OSS, NFV, IoT, and so on. And if in the last 10 years we focused on acquisitions and development in the network space, in the last 3 years we accelerated that with acquisitions that complement what telcos are doing with media, user experience, and of course the network space. So this is kind of in high level what Amdocs is doing in the market. Questions? Okay. So we won't go through the entire portfolio, but the portfolio started in the middle. So it started with what we call business enablement and service monetization. So service monetization, everything billing, charging, rating, up to the network space policy, mediation. On top of that, the customer management, partner management, ordering capabilities. And like I said, in the last few years, we're focusing on moving up the value chain with digital enablement. We bought digital agencies and UX and focusing on UX, but the important part is how we're moving down the value chain and connecting everything together towards operations and network. So the ability to understand that the customer experience, especially now in 5G, is not the bill I get or the user experience in order to order a new cellular, but it has to connect very tightly with my network service, of my quality of service and type of network functioning, especially when we're moving more and more towards B2B, which is the next space where we see most investment. B2B was kind of a stepchild to the major consumer play, especially in North America. Most of the telcos are making a lot of money from B2B, but their focus is when is the next iPhone launch? What am I doing as an TV play and so on? And now we see a lot more focus in B2B where the network is becoming a key part of it.
All right.
Hey. Those?
Oh, hey, I'm going to put Jen on mute one second. Oh, there she is.
Sorry about that, guys. I didn't know.
No worries.
Okay.
No worries.
Okay, you want to take this, Angel?
Yeah, I will. So thank you for the introduction, Hagai. And, if I had to kind of simplify Amdocs, I would say, all of us as consumers and the companies we work for, we need connectivity, we need communication services, right? And pretty much every interaction that you have with a service provider, whether it's going onto their website, whether it's ordering a product, whether it's using your cell phone, whether it's using an internet connection, all of those capabilities are powered by Amdocs products and services. So we're kind of the beating heart of the back office of a service provider. And if you think about where the industry's heading, it's a really exciting time to be in this space because we have digital coming along. And I think T-Mobile like to say, everything's going digital and everything digital's going mobile. And we're kind of at that crux of how do you go digital? How do you leverage and take advantage of 5G? And how do you leverage and take advantage of cloud? And then how do you do that in a highly automated, intelligent way? Because that's the world's moving. So that's where Amdocs is. So we're in the 5G space. We have 5 key offerings around 5G. The first is, and really our vision or our objective around 5G is to enable service providers and the world that they serve to move into the new 5G era. And to be able to deliver the sort of game-changing applications and devices over the 5G network that many of us want. And that's where a lot of the startups that are on the call today come into play. So there are 4 key things that we look at when we think of 5G. The first is, and I think everyone would be, seeing this in the mainstream press, the 5G race is on, okay? The race is on to see who can get the most coverage, who can get the fastest speeds, who can get the 5G networks built. And so our 5G fast offering is all around helping service providers add density, so add more and more coverage and capacity into their 4G networks, and to move from 4G to 5G through network planning and design, through network integration and commissioning, through tuning and optimization, and through rollout and acceptance. Okay, so that's kind of 5G fast. And many of you on the call would know that one of the founding partners of the 5G Open Innovation Lab is T-Mobile, who have the biggest 5G network in the US in terms of spectrum, in terms of coverage, and I think also in terms of speed of service. We are partnering with T-Mobile. We have a division called TTS, who are actually doing a lot of that 5G deployment with T-Mobile. We're also doing it with a couple of the other service providers inside the US, including AT&T and Verizon. The next big thing around 5G is, okay, so you're building a 5G network. How do you start to run that in a highly automated, highly intelligent way? And this is where the part of the organisation that I come from really comes into play. It's all about how do you keep track of where you're going to put network with intelligent inventory systems. The network is becoming a software-based network, which needs capabilities around orchestration. The network you're all probably very familiar with, 5G, is bringing with it the promise of being able to slice network, which basically means allocate resources and capacity almost on demand based on what the intention or the quality of service that a particular app or device needs. Cloud and edge are key because 5G networks by design are meant to be cloud native, and edge is a key thing that's going to move the capabilities of the network and the capabilities of the cloud far closer to the actual end users, whether they be people like you and me or whether they be intelligent devices. And then the final thing is to be able to put in place the autonomous operations, to be able to operate those networks 365 days a year, 24/7, in a highly autonomous way. And then the third area is what Hagai touched on, which is monetization. Look, the service providers are spending billions and billions of dollars buying spectrum, building networks, and they need a way to be able to monetize that investment and grow the revenue. 5G is kind of opening up into much more of an ecosystem play than maybe what we've seen telecommunications before. And so having smart catalog capability that lets a service provider say, these are all the products and services I'm going to put into the market, but here are also all of the applications and devices from my partner ecosystem that I can put into the market, and to be able to launch those into the market and manage the partnerships around those. So that's something that Amdocs brings into play. Revenue One is all around the charging capabilities and the billing capabilities. Policy control is around, it's a bit kind of related to slicing in a way. It's around if a particular service needs a particular quality of experience, then policy control can actually deliver that in the network. And then eSIM and IoT management is all around how do we connect up the billions of devices that are coming onto these networks. And maybe just the final thing to add around this is we see 5G as an open ecosystem. Really, it's around how do you open up the network, the services to application developers, to device developers, to other service providers. How do you make this much more of an open network and open service provider ecosystem through standardization, through APIs, through building and enabling the ecosystems, and also through open source projects. So Amdocs is a significant contributor to many of the standards bodies, particularly around openness. We're heavily involved in Linux Foundation. We co-created the ONAP platform with one of the major service providers. And we're heavily involved around the Open RAN initiatives, which are opening up the RAN to be multi-vendor. So that's kind of a quick view of where we sit in 5G. Any questions before I move on?
I had a couple of questions, Angela, but we could wait until after if you like.
No, I'm fine. Go ahead, Jim.
Okay.
As soon as I can get off Hagai's pitch, the better after his comment about it. It's fine to wake me up at 3 a.m.
There's a gift basket coming your way. So everything you said is absolutely spot on. We, obviously we clearly see the same that you're seeing, but I'm interested to get your take, and I think the teams would be as well, in that 5G, for all its openness and all of its cloudification and all that fun stuff that is coming, is also a fork in the road for the carriers, where they can not only service this cloudification of their network for their consumer business, their broad, massive networks that scale countries, but they could also now enter the enterprise world in a much more meaningful way, initially starting off as sort of a private instance of a network and orchestrating and running that as a service, let's say. But ultimately, it's even getting closer to the application ecosystem, a world where carriers traditionally have not had the same level of integration to the to the software ecosystem as, let's say, the hyperscalers, who essentially built their hyperscale services on apps running on that area. And so I'm curious to get your perspective, both Amdocs's and then your gut check on how this is all sort of now shaping out and where you see this going, both, again, public side, but also on the private side for enterprise.
Yeah, so most of the service providers that I talk to really see the tremendous opportunity, or the fork in the road, as you put it, being around enterprise. I think as consumers, initially what we experience or see around 5G is better coverage and faster service, right? But we're all kind of used to either paying a capped price or an uncapped price for a certain amount of, for a SIM card and a certain amount of data, and it's going to be very hard to monetize much more than that inside the consumer market. But I think when it comes to enterprise, 5G, because of the capabilities that it brings, really opens up a whole world of transformation. And everyone's probably heard the terms, Industry 4.0, right? Mm-hmm. How do enterprises not just become digital in terms of their interaction with their customers, but how do they become digital all the way through their operations? And we're talking about things like manufacturing plants. How do they become completely, robotic? We're talking about some of the things that have really been proven out in COVID, actually. How do you move from seeing a doctor face-to-face to, telemedicine? And how do you move from not just a telemedicine consult with your doctor, but how do you move to having devices in your home that can actually be sending the doctor information like, blood pressure and blood glucose and all of these sorts of things? Industrial health and safety. So everyone's probably seen, smart glasses. They're really starting to take off with technicians who are, now out in the field, maybe not so much in work crews, but on their own and trying to deal with a whole bunch of problems. And the smart glasses are delivering them content that let them be able to do that far more safely, but also, one visit and the job's done rather than, multiple visits where I have to come back to be able to solve it. So I think we're seeing a lot of innovation around the enterprise space and a lot of opportunities to monetize, what I call monetize more than connectivity, right? I think there's an opportunity for the service provider to say, hey, look, yes, I can build a network that gives nationwide coverage and coverage both in dense urban areas, but also out in, big rural areas. I can do that. I know how to do that, and I know how to monetize it. But actually, it's a bit like the internet. People kind of take connectivity and coverage a little bit for granted now. And what they're now looking for is, what can I do with that? And I think that's the opportunity for the service providers to say, look, look at the test beds that you've just built with the farming around agriculture, right? The farms aren't technical people, right? Farmers are farmers. But they want to be able to figure out, how do I get better crops? And, how do I use my resources in terms of watering and fertilization better? And they want these solutions to their business. And I think that's the opportunity for, the service providers, is to say, I am almost the technology player, a bit like a hyperscaler, that doesn't just deliver you the connectivity and the cloud and the edge that enables this, but actually I deliver you the ecosystem of these applications. And if you think about what a service provider does really, really well, they know how to run things mission critical 24/7, right? Which is what you want if, say, you're a farmer and your whole livelihood is based on, these digital apps you're now using. You want to make sure they keep working. And I think, this ecosystem gets complicated. Right, it's not. My comment about it would be, I think in the 4G era, 4G enabled the app economy that we all know and love today, right? But it was all best effort over the top. Okay, and so it could kind of run as, the service provider provides, the smart connectivity, and the hyperscalers provide the platforms, and then the app vendors kind of build against those two things, and hey presto, it all largely just works. I don't think 5G services are going to be like that. I think 5G services need a very, very close tie with both the network and the cloud, and need to take advantage of those two things. So, kind of the opportunity and the challenge, I would say, for many of the people on the phone is, how are you going to build your app or your device for connectivity? How are you going to build it for latency? How are you going to build it for resiliency? How are you going to build it for security? How are you going to build it for privacy? All of these new capabilities need to be built very closely between the app, the cloud, and the network. And I think that's the opportunity that the service providers are kind of stepping into, saying we can be the enabler for that ecosystem.
Rightly so. And given your position at Amdocs, you get to see how, thank you for that, Angela, you get to see how different organizations, different service providers are addressing that. Some are signing agreements with Microsoft and Azure for the Azure Edge, or AWS or Google, whomever. I've heard of closed room, cigarettes lit conversations around interoperable networks between carriers for the Edge. There's the Future 5G Forum effort.
Yep.
I'd love to get your perspective. There's a lot of, remember those days of storming, norming, and then forming? It feels like we're still in the storming phase.
Absolutely. Yeah.
If you were to predict what norming looks like, I think it's going to be, kind of a hairy. Yeah. I'd love to get get your perspective. Certainly in Southeast Asia, there's a lot of both innovation and speed in deploying 5G networks. So they're kind of there. They're seeing a lot of what these networks are capable of. Whereas here in the U.S., I think we're certainly catching up at a global level, but not entirely there. I'd love to get your perspective on what you're seeing differently in different pockets of the world, and any insights you might be able to share there.
Yeah, so I would say South Korea is probably leading in terms of the innovation around 5G, where because they are forming sort of very close strategic partnerships between, big companies like South Korea Telecom and big companies like Samsung, right? And so that the two of those come together, and actually they came together to do things without the edge and without the cloud, or maybe with private edge and private cloud initially, right? So it wasn't so much the hyperscalers, it was the big service providers directly with either the big device manufacturers or the big technology arms. So South Korea and Samsung were saying, hey, look, we're building new medical centers. Let's build these from the ground up with ubiquitous 5G coverage, with the purpose that we're going to enable, remote surgery, remote diagnostics. You walk into the reception and there's a robot that greets you and takes all of your patient details and then escorts you off to, whatever wing of the hospital you need to go to. There's no sort of walking into a hospital anymore and having to deal with people or trying to figure out which corridor do I go down, or so that they've started saying, hey, look, let's do new things in a new way, and they're forming these strategic partnerships, and they started doing that, and then over time they've said, but actually the cloud and the edge brings even more capability into that, so let's add the hyperscalers into it. And on that, I think there are strategic relationships happening. We're seeing at one of Amdocs's, partners around is Microsoft around the private enterprise edge, which is perfect for a hospital, right? Because a hospital is a specific geographic location. There's a lot of privacy and security and sensitivity about medical records. If you think about remote surgery, you want it all on site. You want that just to work, right? So there's some perfect applications around these private enterprise networks. I think service providers see themselves as multi-cloud operators, though, partially because they will say, hey, look, my enterprise, doesn't want to do business with somebody or another. I was talking to a very big retail SI based in the US not long ago, and they said, look, there's no way we can work with one of the big hyperscalers because all of our retail customers are in competition with them, right? You can guess. And so, I don't think it's as simple as saying we will form a close strategic partnership. I think there needs to be openness even in these partnerships. But what do I see going forward? I think people are going to specialize. I think the level of the size of ecosystems, the level of complexity of these apps, devices, networks, cloud and edge capabilities mean you're going to see companies starting to specialize. And you can probably see it now in terms of every service provider, if you look at it, is starting to make acquisitions. So they're buying key bits of technology, whether it's bits of healthcare, whether it's bits of logistics, whether it's bits of manufacturing. They're kind of buying in some both technology and industry vertical expertise so that they can build a critical mass around some of the markets that they want to go into. So I think you will get nationwide connectivity, consumer mobility, and then I think you're going to get, if I'm a healthcare provider, here's the service provider I'm going to go to because they're absolutely the market leader in this.
Yep. And I think you may have touched on this earlier, but if you don't mind, I'd like to just go back one bit, which is how is Amdocs enabling the private end of 5G as well? You may have covered this already, but maybe we can just spend a minute on that.
Yeah. I assume everyone knows what private enterprise networks are. So private enterprise networks, in my sort of simple terminology, is where you provide dedicated resources and dedicated capacity for the use of a specific enterprise. Okay. Now, actually, it doesn't mean 100% of everything is for that enterprise. You might have most private enterprise networks are kind of looking at some sort of hybrid. You might have some shared spectrum, or you might have some shared RAN, or you might have a shared core, or you might have dedicated spectrum, dedicated RAN, dedicated core, or any combination in between them, right? But it's effectively, let's build a network for a specific enterprise. And I think one of the reasons this is happening first is two things. The first is I think it's easy to get focused around a specific enterprise and figure out, what are their needs. And the second thing is I think while we're in the early stages of 5G, where 5G is not everywhere yet, certainly edge and cloud is not there in the network everywhere yet, it's much harder to offer enterprise use cases that need to be nationwide. Okay, so think about if I've got Boeing in Seattle, for example, right? Huge campus. I think I read it's something like 70 football fields big. Now think about starting to automate the Boeing factory, and it's kind of a known problem, right? You can, the radio engineers can go in there and they can figure out where do I need to put, either small cells or 5G base stations. The edge engineers can go in there and figure out where am I going to place the edge. And then the apps and devices can come in and say, hey, I need, robotics that are riveting in real time with, almost less than 10 milliseconds latency between the two sides of the robots. Or the smart glasses people can be coming in and saying, okay, I'm inspecting the aircraft as they're being built, and sending the information back to an AI engine who's checking everything in real time as it's going and signing off on it. You can kind of get your head around these use cases and build for them. So I think that's one reason that private enterprise networks are happening first. It lets us bite off a little bit of the problem, a specific use case for a specific industry, and actually solve for it. I think the second reason is, it's a limited geographic location. So you can surround it with the right network, and you can then, manage it as a network. Think about that versus autonomous cars, where you've got to, have them be able to go anywhere in the nation. It's a much harder problem to solve, right? So private enterprise networks is certainly where the enterprise innovation around 5G is happening today. What's Amdocs doing? We are doing a couple of things. So the first thing I mentioned right up front in our 5G Fast offering, we're out there building private enterprise networks today. We're building them for universities, we're building them for utility companies, we're building them for train and bus networks. We're building private enterprise networks for enterprises that are saying, hey, maybe I had a Wi-Fi network, or maybe I had a 3G or a 4G network. I now need a 5G network. Amdocs is out there doing it. The second thing that we're doing is we are forming ecosystem partnerships. Microsoft is one of our key strategic partners around this, where we're saying, how do we, bring together the service provider who typically has the RAN and the spectrum and the ability to run these networks, with Microsoft, who's got a really, really good edge and core capability for private enterprise networks, with Amdocs as the automation and intelligence layer that turns that into a monetizable service for the service provider. So we've formed that partnership, and we're working on in 5G Open Innovation Lab around it, and then we're out in the market. And again, back to your point, the key thing around this is bringing on all the apps and devices, right? Because that's what people want. So we are also working with a number of startups and scale-ups to be building end-to-end industry use cases.
Excellent. And I know we're just starting in this 5G journey. It was very helpful to have Apple step into their first 5G phone, because I think that will lift the rest of the ecosystem. But in terms of proliferation of 5G devices, I think we're still, maybe 3 years out from full ubiquity. What is your perspective on that, Angela?
Yeah, so I agree with you. I think we were all waiting for the 5G iPhone. Look, I think they're, I'm just trying to remember the numbers, Jim. I think probably about 6 months ago, there were around 500 different 5G capable devices in the market, which sounds like a lot if you're just thinking about handsets, but actually this is devices, right? This is sensors that can talk 5G, or tractors that can talk 5G, or drones that can talk 5G. So I agree with you. I think we're a couple of years out from devices being 5G ready. But the second thing I think you then have to factor in on top of that is replacement cycles. And, even for devices, the average replacement cycle is 2.5 years. So even once the phone's there, by the time everyone's gone through and replaced it, you're talking about, at least 2.5 years. And that replacement cycle gets longer the more expensive the device. So imagine coming up with a business case to replace a tractor. Right? It's a much harder thing to do. So I think we're at the very start of the journey. But again, I think this is why private enterprise networks work so well, because that will be a part of a bigger business case around retooling or digitizing an enterprise.
Yep. Do you mind if I ask one more question? I don't want to hog too much more time, but I just had one specific enterprise.
Yep.
Okay. So from our data and from our limited discussions here in the United States, the industries that we have seen really taken a keen interest in 5G are around the following. Utilities is definitely one area. Agriculture, although that is still very much a building opportunity. Healthcare is on that list as well. And then we've looked at transportation. So anything with shipping, receiving, port operations, tracking of containers, trusted supply chain, all that fun stuff in sort of transportations. From your vantage point and from the enterprise and discussions that you've been part of, what would you say are the one or two leading reasons why they're looking into private 5G? Some of it would say, some people would say, look, it's a raging debate between cellular-based connectivity versus Wi-Fi for all of the security and speed and consistent attributes that come with cellular versus Wi-Fi. That's one of the big reasons. Others are saying, hey, the connectivity is really the means to the on-site computing access as well, right? This blended aspect that you've talked. But I'd love to get your perspectives, because you do sit across different operators, seeing what different needs are happening in there, and likely on the enterprise side too.
Yeah, so I would say, look, to be honest, one of the first things that's driving enterprises, particularly in the US, is spectrum. So everyone's probably aware of the US initiative around CBRS, freeing up spectrum in the 3 gigahertz range that can be not just not licensed out to typically service providers, but shared by enterprises and SIs and smaller ISPs. And that spectrum didn't just come from somewhere, right? Some of it came from the US Navy, but some of it came from other bits of spectrum that the government freed up. And enterprises were actually using that spectrum that was freed up. And so some of the early adopters of 4G heading into 5G are people that have kind of been forced to, because the existing networks that they were running, they can no longer run, okay? So there's an obsolescence issue that's forcing them to move. The second thing I think that's happened around it is COVID. I think COVID has kind of forced many organisations to say, look, how am I going to go completely digital? How am I going to support students who are studying from home, for example? So some of the universities, for example, they're now doing virtual reality. So the life sciences or the medical sciences, they're now doing virtual reality autopsies of bodies and teaching.
Wow.
Because they have to, right? They can't get all the students into the labs to do it. So they've had to figure out, how do we continue to educate our students in things where video is just not enough. So I think there's been an acceleration of need. But I think the third thing is companies are always looking for ways to innovate and differentiate and, do things at bigger scale and, do things at lower costs. And kind of, 5G is the way of doing it. Why 5G versus Wi-Fi? Look, I think 4G, 5G, Wi-Fi are going to coexist together for a long time, especially as, Wi-Fi 6 comes into play. I think it's going to depend on the use cases. Latency's absolutely one of the key ones that's driving 5G. Okay, so anything that needs that, less than 20, I'd say less than 10 milliseconds of latency is going to be a private enterprise network. And I would say privacy and security and regulation around where data can sit, especially once you get more, maybe not so much in the US, but once you get into Europe and data has to sit in certain geographic locations because of the data regulations. I think those sort of things actually drive, 5G, where you can have an edge on site and all the data sits there. But I do think 5G will become the standard technology for these things. Why? Because it's not so much just about the 5G network versus the Wi-Fi network. I think it's about the level of control that you can put on top of it, the level of automation, the level of intelligence, and then also, what's going to attract the ecosystem.
Right.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. Okay. I'll stop here. I have more questions, but I wanted to open it up in case anybody from the various teams had questions they wanted to raise. Okay. Did you want to cover off any additional slides?
So I'm just going to stop sharing. No, I think I've covered all of the slides, and look, we will share the deck.
Yep.
But maybe just to summarize, this is what Amdocs is all about. It's bringing together the technology and the software and the services that are really going to enable this ecosystem and this innovation and digitization that we talked about, and to do it in an automated and intelligent way. And we really are around partnering. We're partnering with the service providers, we're partnering with the hyperscalers, and we're partnering with many of the innovative startups and around applications and devices. And that's the opportunity we see in the 5G Open Innovation Lab, is all of those things come together. Jim, you said it was, you said we're in the storming phase and what's going to become norming. I think the only way we're going to start to get to norming is when we make this stuff work, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah.
I have a question. I was going to ask you on that point, but Peter from MantisNet had raised his hand for a question. So Peter, I'll defer to you for that.
Oh, sure. Thanks. Great presentation. There's an old saying in the standards world, the great thing about standards is there's so many of them. And so people get to pick and choose whichever ones they want or, differentiate themselves with.
And then say, I made it even better.
That's right. Vendor unique standards.
Everyone's a winner.
That's an oxymoron. So at MantisNet, we rely on and we're all about openness and observability. But do you really see the subsystem and the component vendors, hardware and software suppliers in the ecosystem? Are they taking this kind of jaundiced view to standards, or are they truly endorsing openness to the point to where the service providers and folks like yourself who have to monitor and manage these systems really have the accessibility to the various systems and to the telemetry you need? Or is it still much these walled gardens like it used to be in 4G and in previous generations?
I think it's getting much better, but it is not there yet. But I think there are just like in any industry, there are disruptors coming into play that are kind of forcing the issue. So do I think the big incumbent vendors who have a lot of change to make to adopt this, and maybe a lot to lose around this, do I think they're moving as fast as they can? No, they're absolutely not. But do I think there's enough momentum around 5G and it being cloud native and the disruptions that are happening around standards and core networks and edge networks and open RAN networks? I think there's enough disruption going on that we're seeing movement in the right direction.
Yeah, well, we certainly see ourselves as a disruptor in that area as well. So cool. Thank you.
Yep.
Kevin, did you have a question from Symmetric?
I did, Jim. Thank you. And it really builds on Peter's question to an extent. And by the way, Angela, I think you have more energy at 3 a.m. than I do at like 12 o'clock in the afternoon. So after exercise. So good on you. I'd hate to see you post espresso.
Yeah, believe it or not, this is not coffee. This is just herbal tea because I'll go back to sleep after this. So.
All good, as you should. You talked about that the promise of 5G really is the marriage of the cloud and the public providers and the network. Yep. But yet a lot of your conversation stemmed around the advancements around the public cloud and less around the network equipment providers. And I'm just curious, I come from a background where I'm curious your take on, is the rate of innovation and disruption to the network matching the level of innovation from the public cloud providers to actually meet the 5G promise?
Yes. So look, maybe I underplayed the importance of the 5G network. I think the innovation in the 5G network is what is driving or enabling all of this, right? I think without the 5G network becoming a software-defined, cloud-based network, without it starting to make the improvements in, think about what 5G brings us, right? So we kind of think of 5G as just another G, right? But actually it's not. It's giving, 30% more spectrum efficiency. And we know that spectrum is the big, rare asset that's out there, right? There's no more of it. And everyone wants it, and we've got to be able to use it far more effectively. It's bringing significant speed improvements. It's letting far more devices connect. Ever been to, a concert or a sporting event? You can't even get onto the network. Now imagine that when you've got billions and billions of devices out there. So 5G is actually bringing the ability to put far more devices onto the network in a given area. It's bringing latency, absolutely a key one, right? And that's never been manageable before. It's bringing consistency. So, one of the most frustrating things things is you can be driving down a highway and 1 minute you can have, 25 megabits of service and another minute can be dropping down to, 3 or 4. But 5G brings that consistency of, 100 megs everywhere. So you can do, it's not a problem when it's us on a phone, okay, but it is a problem when it's a car connecting to the network, for example. Battery life, my phone goes flat 3 or 4 times a day. It's incredible, just between me and kids using it and everything else and traveling around. The devices are the big limiting factor that we have today. And if you can actually move the processing power off the device into the edge because you've now got a 5G network, you can start to have far more powerful capabilities in your hand that doesn't need you carrying around a big device or a charger because your battery's always going flat. So actually 5G, and I could go on, there's privacy, there's security, but all of these things are actually new innovation in the 5G network. And right up front, I was talking about, I think app and device developers need to develop the apps and devices for the network and for the cloud. That's kind of what I was talking about. People need to understand, here are unique things the network can deliver me through a policy, through a slice, through an API. How am I going to use that to build a better app?
Thank you. I echo a lot that you just said, but I was curious in how you presented it, just to circle back and make sure that we address the network side of it, because again, I come from a side where I could argue their speed of disruption is oftentimes defensive versus actually progressive on the innovation side. So
yeah, look, the hyperscalers are moving at a space that all of us are in awe of, right? But I don't want to underplay the importance of the innovation that's happened in 5G network. And look, could there be more things there around openness? Could there be more things there around automation and embedded AI? Absolutely. But I think the baseline technology innovation that we've got in 5G is the reason we're all here talking, right? This was not driven by the hyperscalers. This was driven by the innovation in the 5G network.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree. You didn't say it incorrectly, nor did I want to imply that you did. It was just I wanted the perspective. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, Kevin comes from a background at Cisco prior to Symmetric.
Okay.
Angela. So there's probably some good, good side chatter for you both on that.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
He was part of the org that kind of built the internet. So last question from me, Angela, is I think it was early December of last year, so not too far ago. I was invited by Access, which is a ecosystem group in Tel Aviv, to join a panel. And on this panel were 3 carriers. I won't mention names, but 3 carriers, and they're all heads of innovations for each of these carriers. And so one of the questions asked of the panel from a startup is, hey, I'm a budding startup. I'm doing something related to or in value of or in service of 5G. What advice do you have to work with you guys? How would you best approach it? And all 3 panelists said, oh, we're horrible to work with. And they're heads of innovation. That was the funny piece. Being on your side of the fence at Amdocs, because you work with a lot of carriers. What advice could you give our teams around really how to approach the opportunity with carriers? Because it is not a straight path in many cases. It sometimes is a lot of listening and a lot of understanding what their priorities are and such. But I'd love your advice on how to best approach carriers on that. We have this anomaly with T-Mobile in that they've been actually very open, and so it's been really easy to. But for other carriers around the world, what advice would you share for our teams around engaging?
Look, I think the challenge being a startup and approaching the carriers is that the carriers love technology, right? But they also love to run incredibly long cycles, putting technology through its paces in the labs, and it maybe never sees the light of day in terms of commercial deployment. So I think it's hard. I think the opportunity. One, this is where I think 5G Open Innovation Lab is incredible, right? Because you've got a carrier there, you've got the hyperscalers there, you've got industry leaders like Amdocs there. This is the perfect sandpit to put it all together and to prove something. And the reason for that is I think the way to approach the carriers now is around this enterprise space. I think every carrier is now looking at I've just spent billions of dollars. How am I going to get a return on this investment? How am I going to get into enterprise? And they're all saying, somebody please bring me in a really great, not a great idea, somebody bring me in a great thing I can put into the marketplace.
Yep.
Okay, so
Yep.
they want this thing to be well defined. They want this thing to be working. They want this thing to leverage, their 5G ecosystem, their hyperscale ecosystem. They're looking for somebody to bring all the bits of the puzzle together. And so my advice to people is use the 5G Open Innovation Lab to actually be able to say, this is how it works against spectrum. This is how it works against a 5G network. This is how it works against a 5G edge. This is how it works with, AI and automation software. Here's the use case. And then go into the enterprise arms of carriers and say, here is something that in 3 months' time you could launch into the market and start to be building new revenue. I think that's maybe the change in carriers is you're now no longer trying to convince them to put this stuff into the network or to, disrupt their existing big consumer bases. I think there's a brand new greenfield market for them, and they're, I don't want to say desperate, they're really, really keen to find something that fits into that, and that's the opportunity.
Excellent. Wonderful. Kurt, did you have a question you want to ask? And it'll be the last one, I guess, for today.
Yeah, in fact, it was maybe more of a recommendation for the folks in the cohort. Having a lot of experience in watching one of those hyperscalers build their product, right, but not actually architecting it as a service, right, and then having to watch them bring in their Xbox consumer service focused people at the last minute to actually enable that product before they launched as a service. I think there's a tremendous amount of expertise sitting inside of Amdocs, right? That as you think about when you're building your product, and we're all approaching this as a service, right? Is to lean in heavily with the Amdocs team and have them look at the architecture of your product, right? In such a way, this is a tremendous amount of expertise on actually provisioning and delivering product as a service, and they sit right in the middle of that architecture stack, and I think they have some great perspective. And so when you engage with Hagai and team, make sure you're asking for a good review of your overall architecture and your product, because I think they're going to give you some insights on making sure that your product is set up for great service delivery across all these platforms, both the hyperscaler side of things as well as what's going on in the 5G networks.
Hey, Kurt, that's a really good point. That $20 that Jim's giving to Hagai, Hagai's giving to me, I'm now giving to you.
Wow, someone slipped him some money.
Yeah,
Is that called passing the buck?
Yes. Petri, you wanted to ask something?
Yes.
Your hand.
Actually, it's a kind of a follow-up question to many follow-up questions. So, Angela, hey, long time.
It has been. Hi.
So you guys are working closely with Microsoft Azure, and same thing with Google Cloud. So there's press releases out there. So how do you see the that real life ecosystem with CSPs and the cloud providers? There's a lot of press release also. Vodafone working with a certain cloud provider for their private cloud, Verizon, the same thing. What's the reality? How do you see it? Because what I'm after is a straightforward system where any third-party software vendors can implement their use cases easily. And to me, it looks like that many of these environments in CSPs are still for their internal purposes, and bringing a software vendor is a new thing to them, to that environment. And I think that's a little bit of a hurdle or bottleneck still to be scaling up fast in an open manner.
Yeah. So I think we're going to be in a multi-cloud, multi-edge world, and I think there are some architectural decisions that software vendors need to make along the way as to Are they going to, build their main dev pipeline on one cloud and then figure out how to migrate that onto other clouds as necessary? Or are they going to take a more, plain vanilla Kubernetes approach to cloud and maybe miss some of the more sophisticated tooling of each of the cloud vendors, but be more easily portable? I don't think there's an easy answer here, Petri. I do think the service providers are moving to cloud and software at an amazing pace, starting in the IT organizations, but also more increasingly moving into the network and the edge, and then also for the device and app ecosystem. So I think it's definitely happening that way. It's happening fast, but I don't think it's a easy decision to say which cloud are we going to base on, because they've all pretty much got multi-cloud strategies. Maybe, private enterprise networks, they're picking one vendor for, MEC, they're picking another for, the IT data center, they're picking another for, the network cloud for, the telco cloud, they're picking another for. It's not straightforward. But I think the great news is it's becoming software, right? And the great news is, because it is becoming cloud, that level of that discussion we were having around standardization, and maybe standardization is not the right word, but APIs and openness is absolutely there, right? It's a known quantity how to build against each of the cloud vendors, and that's a good thing.
Yeah. And also enter Project Geneva.
Pardon, what was that?
Project Geneva,
yes,
which is our open
absolutely.
API. Yeah.
So
Wow,
I didn't know whether we could mention that, but I absolutely think that's incredible, right? Yeah. So being building, there's a number of service providers around the world that are kind of exploring how do we open up the network and the cloud and our back office to enable apps and devices to better build against us. It's very early days, and I think, Project Geneva is absolutely spot on. Building this level of abstraction, this level of simplification around it is exactly what all of you guys need, right?
Yeah, just democratize this space so software could run anywhere and everywhere. Yeah, agreed. And what I love about that, and this is not a shameless plug of Amdocs, but what I love about what you guys have done with Market One is everything you mentioned earlier, Angela, with Market One being this known way for apps to be deployed, provisioned, build properly, and all that fun stuff. I think that helps to lower the temperature with carriers who really want to know that there's this security sense, right? That the apps could run and provision well and all that fun stuff. So lots of awesome opportunity.
Yes. So Kurt kind of touched on it before, right? The barrier with the service provider is how am I going to operate this thing, and how am I going to launch this thing into the market? How am I going to let customers order this thing? How am I going to let the call center take care of this thing? How am I going to bill for this thing? It sounds easy when we talk about it, but hey, look, Amdocs is a $4.5 billion business, right? There's complexity in this space, and that's the carrier's biggest concern is, how on earth do I operate this app or this device and deliver it out to my customers? And that's where Amdocs is coming into play, and we're recognizing that this is much more an app and a device and an ecosystem play, and we're building the products to enable that. And I think that's the real value we're bringing into the 5G Open Innovation Lab for all of the app and device vendors who are on the phone. Talk to us. We want to enable you to get your thing into the market.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Angela,
it's a final point I'll make on that is that, and if you don't think about that as you're architecting your IP and your core product, you will create basically the need to go back and completely rebuild your product. Trust me, I've seen it happen on a big scale, right? And it will cost you a lot of money to go back and fix it. So think about it as you're architecting your initial product, is think about the service delivery model, that provisioning model, the support models, all those things have to be part of your product design.
Yep. Because if they're not, either you're going to have to go back and redo them, or it's going to be 24 months before your stuff sees the light of day in a carrier, because by the time they've adjusted their systems to your product, it's just never going to happen.
Well said. Listen, my friend, it's super early in the morning. It sounds like the birds are waking up behind you, and you probably need to go back to bed. It's actually kind of soothing. But anyhow, thank you, Angela, for waking up so early in the morning to meet our teams. We really appreciate you and your time today. Thank you again.
Yeah, you're welcome, Jim. Fantastic job, everybody. Bye.
Okay.